when you exit the Chambers Street station in downtown Manhattan, you're going up this steep incline of stairs, and at the top of the stairs, framed perfectly, is the Twin Towers, or was. I remember it was a absolutely beautiful, beautiful fall morning. It almost felt like springtime, though. It was absolutely gorgeous. Literally not a cloud in the sky. I uncharacteristically paused at the top of the stairs and looked at the Twin Towers, and I said, it's good to be alive. And I started my trip, which entailed about a 3-block walk from Chambers Street all the way up to the one Chambers Street. One Center Street was the office that I worked at. The unique thing about One Center Street address is that it is across the street from the mayor's office, which is great because we did a lot of we worked with the mayor quite a bit, and is at the foot of the Brooklyn Bridge. So a lot of tourists would come there. We're at the foot of Chinatown and Little Italy and all those other places. So it was really a neat place to work. When I was about halfway to my office, we heard this deafening sound, and I think subconsciously I recognized that it was an airplane. The reason I didn't believe it is that normally when we're hearing airplanes, they're behind, several inches of thick glass at the airport.
Yeah.
And, they're just idling basically at that point, relatively quiet. If you can imagine a jet going full throttle, about maybe 700-800 feet off the ground, so loud that all the people on the street literally dropped to their knees, because first it sounded like it was going to crash right on top of us. I looked up and I saw that it passed overhead, and when I stood, I watched the first plane plow into the North Tower of the World Trade Center. Lots of paper, glass, lots of steel, debris burst from the 3 sides of the tower that I could see. Flames and smoke began coming out a minute later, and I just watched all these sheets of paper floating down, and I remember having the oddest thought. I recalled it looked just like the ticker tape parades that they have in Manhattan. I could see this confetti falling into the streets below, and I wondered if this was just an accident or if this was an act of terrorism. So I immediately called my wife on the phone. My wife immediately assured me that this was most certainly not an accident. She knew that, the towers had been there for years. Nobody accidentally flew into this thing, and that someone had done it intentionally. I told her I would check on my staff and let her know what was happening. And I rushed along with many others to our respective offices. And I could already feel the adrenaline pumping, pushing me along. By about 8:55 a.m., I reached my office. I began talking with my deputy director, Bob Devlin. We had worked together many, many years, and I could see the Twin Towers from my office. I was on the 17th floor of the Manhattan Municipal Building, which, like I say, is at the foot of the Brooklyn Bridge, which gives me an absolutely unobstructed view of the Twin Towers. After spending a few minutes deciding on what we should do, my staff started screaming, and I looked up, and just in time to see that another plane was now flying directly toward the South Tower. Since it came from the opposite direction, I could not see the impact directly, but from the rupture of smoke and flames that exploded out the opposite side, it was certainly a direct hit. It was certainly clear to me at this point that this was no accident. And shortly after 9 a.m., I telephoned my wife one last time to let her know what had happened, because for her, all the television sets had suddenly gone blank because of the broadcast towers that were on the South Tower. I told her I would let her know, and I would try to contact her somehow as I made my way home. At that point, all cell phone service abruptly terminated. Um, we immediately began organizing the evacuation of our staff. I did not check in with anybody. Many of the other offices were already deserted. I had 46 very frightened people who had to be calmed down before we could make any progress. And we basically, what we did was we paired them up, made sure that they had a destination that was hopefully a safe distance from the World Trade Center. Unfortunately, nobody really knew what a safe distance was. When everybody had a way home and was out the door, Bob and I, now alone on the 17th floor of our office, we looked out at the smoking towers and prepared to leave. My friend Bob's daughter, Kate, went to school in downtown Manhattan. Her school was actually very, very close by. We decided our first thing we had to do was make sure she was all right. So the plan was we would travel together. Once we had her, he would take her back to Brooklyn, and I would find some way to travel to Queens, which is the borough I lived in, and hopefully find transportation home. That was going to be a futile hope, as I will play. The elevators had all been recalled to the lobby, so we walked down 17 flights of stairs and through the side entrance. We figured we would cut through One Police Plaza, which is right directly behind the Manhattan Municipal Building. That turned out to be a mistake. As we were walking toward One Police Plaza, the first people that were coming out of the buildings who had been caught in a lot of the smoke and debris were arriving at our building, and they were asking for water to drink and to wash off their faces. You could not tell what color, or all of them were covered in gray ash from head to toe. So you had absolutely no idea who they were or what color they were or anything. I remember washing off the face of a woman and just seeing the relief on her face just to get that contamination off of her. We left that. Other people were doing that, so we started to go to through One Police Plaza, Bob and I, and we were confronted by two federal marshals armed with a riot gun and an automatic weapon demanding identification. They had no idea who we were. They didn't know we worked in the building. To avoid getting shot, we just knelt down very carefully. We produced our identification, and the two justifiably nervous officers order us back the way we had come. They weren't letting anyone get near One Police Plaza because, understandably, nobody knew if there was going to be more attacks. And because all communications were down, we did not know about Pennsylvania. We did not know about, the other planes that had been dispatched. Just before 10 a.m., we looked back toward the World Trade Center, and the two of us witnessed South Tower's slow collapse. At least it seemed slow. It just seemed like it was just very, very gracefully shrinking down into this little pile, and it just disappeared from sight.
When you saw that first plane go in,
Yeah.
And did you go down on the ground as well, like everybody else?
Yeah.
Did you get down on your knees? And
I did.
You're looking around at these other people. What do you
Yep.
see on their faces?
Oh, they were terrified. They were, at first we thought, well, maybe he's headed for the river. Maybe he's making an emergency landing. But at the altitude that he was at and the detail that I could see on the undercarriage of that jet, he wasn't making the river. I knew, I was just hoping he would not hit anything. Obviously I had no way of knowing that it was absolutely their intention to hit something.
Were you nervous being on the 17th floor of your building?
Really, we were very focused. We had people that we had to take care of. They had to be paired up, and they had to be, we had to make sure that they had what at least they felt was a safe place to go. and I wanted them to contact me to let me know that they had arrived safely. And then it was more focused about getting Bob's daughter and making sure she was all right. And then I had to make my way home. So we walked about 45 minutes till we neared a building where Bob's daughter attended grade school. In the distance, we heard the thunderous collapse of the second tower. That's a noise I will never forget. It just sounded like this long, slow roar, and then it just stopped. After we got his daughter, we shook hands, and I continued on the road alone in a crowd of many thousands that were walking away. Essentially, it was the people that were found out later. The people that were below, further downtown in Manhattan, they were all actually going to the coast, and a flotilla of boats from New Jersey was taking people across. We were basically walking. I was headed toward the either the 59th Street Bridge or the Midtown Tunnel, whichever was open, or whichever I could get to first.
What were your plans once you got there? How are you planning on getting out? Did you not know? You were just
walking. We knew that there was going to be no subways running because of the, most people don't realize Manhattan sinks about 10 inches every day when all the people commute to the island of Manhattan. Literally hundreds of thousands of cars and over 1 million people come to Manhattan every day. The island actually sinks almost 10 inches. All right. Imagine all those people simultaneously trying to evacuate the city. It was way more orderly than it should have been, but like I say, once I left, I would have taken the Brooklyn Bridge, but all the people that were on the Brooklyn Bridge abandoned their cars, and it was clogged basically with vehicles from one end to the other. And since I was not up for trying to literally climb from car to car to car, I decided to walk to Midtown.
Were you terrified? How are you feeling?
Numb at this point. It was
Unreal.
Yeah, it seemed it did seem very, very unreal. And I was
apocalyptic.
Eventually I got angrier than numb. And I think it was mostly because I felt like, how dare someone attack my city, my country. It was, I feel like sometimes when you're angry, you can't be afraid. Like you just can't feel those two things at once. So I was headed toward the Midtown Manhattan. I found an injured woman who had been hit by debris. So I diverted and helped her along, and we walked to a local hospital. I forget which one. And I saw that she got help. And then the two of us, once she had been bandaged up and discharged, the strange thing is when we went to the hospital, all these medical personnel was stationed outside with gurneys, blankets, bandages, plasma. I mean, they were ready for thousands of injured people to be coming to the hospital.
And it's sad they didn't come, did they?
They never came. They ended up staying there. And the city of New York, I'll tell you, one of the first purchases they made was tens of thousands of body bags, because they just thought that there would be this horrific loss of life. And who knows how many other planes were going to be flying or crashing that day. Which is another story, which I'll get to if we have time.
You have lots of mini stories, don't you?
Oh, it was interesting. I did some research later on. Again, I was feeling too angry to think about how tired I was, and I began my long walk uptown. Along the way, many businesses had placed radios and televisions outside, playing loudly, with people huddled around the televisions, just like kids around the Macy's windows at Christmas. They're just all desperate for any kind of news. Nobody could use their cell phone. Once I cleared 14th Street, I tried to find a payphone to call home, but the lines were impossibly long. I could have waited there the rest of the day and never gotten to the phone. Anyway, I helped this woman to the hospital. We began walking uptown. Now, at this point, they started flying. Jets were flying overhead, and
Fighter jets.
People were just praying that they were American jets. Just from a personal familiarity, I was pretty sure they were F-16s. So I wasn't terribly nervous about them, but they kept streaking back and forth across the sky. Who knows what they were looking for, or hunting, or what else. At that point, it was the NYU Medical Center. That's what it was, 25th Street and First Avenue. She was getting treated. I remember using the restroom, getting water, which was in very short supply. Sat for a bit. Those who were seeking to evacuate by car had to abandon their cars because every route out of the city was clogged. We found a city bus that was actually still working. We got on the bus, and after driving a few feet, we literally sat there for almost an hour. And finally, we just asked the driver to discharge us, and we began walking again. To tell you the truth, walking just felt better than doing nothing.
And just sitting there.
Yeah.
And how are the people looking as you're walking around? Are people looking like zombies? Are they talking?
Nervous? Just a lot of people rushing away from the towers. Some holding hands for family members. Who knows?
Were they talking, or was it mostly
No, it was
silence?
eerily quiet.
And what are you hearing through the city then? What noises are you hearing? Sirens? What?
The first noise I remember hearing when we got out of the hospital, there was this tiny police officer, a young police woman. This had to be the crappiest day of her life. I'm sorry, but she was standing up on one of these giant planters that New York uses to basically keep cars from going where they're not supposed to.
Mm-hmm.
So she's standing up on this, telling people to keep calm, to keep going. And I had an extra bottle of water, and I told her, I said, "Lady, I wouldn't take your job for all the tea in China." Gave her the bottle of water, which she seemed to really appreciate. You could see her uniform blouse was soaking wet. I mean, she's just standing there in the sunlight, trying to maintain order. I have such tremendous respect for the police and all the uniform services that responded that day. And you could always tell that that they were police officers, because they were running in the opposite direction of all the other people that were evacuating.
And it's really scary or kind of, I don't want to say eerie, to think how many of them didn't come back.
A lot of them lost their life. I'll talk about that a little bit later. We eventually made it across the 59th Street Bridge. Now, right across the 59th Street Bridge is the LaGuardia Community College. I got an associate's degree in accounting there. And there's some payphones right at the end of the bridge. And of course, there was 100 people online, all looking to try and call on the landline, because that's the only way people can call. Now, as a student there, I remember that there was a diner 2 blocks behind that college. And outside that diner, there was, I remember, an old payphone. And I said, what are the odds of that payphone still being there and still working? Sure enough, we had 1 quarter between the two of us. She called her husband and asked, "Is there any way you can meet us at such and such a place?" And he jumped right in the car and he came right over. We tried to get on the highway to get out of, we were just at the tip of, we had left Manhattan just at the tip of Queens. and we needed to head east. And the police weren't letting anybody onto the highway. They were reserving those roads for ambulances, fire trucks, and such. And I showed my city ID to the officer, and I said, "Look, these people are just, we just escaped ground zero." I said, "These people are trying to get me home." I said, "It's one car. Could you let us through?" And he did. He allowed us to pass. To make a long story short, they were kind enough to give me a ride to Flushing, Queens. I knew Lillian had an aunt and uncle Mahoney were in Queens. I was covered in dirt and ash, and after washing up a bit and eating something, I rested for a bit, and they insisted on driving me out to Long Island where my wife was. And we were finally reunited. This was at 10 o'clock at night. So
what a long day.
It had taken me more than half a day, over 13 hours since we had spoken. And she confessed she wasn't sure if she would ever see me alive again. I was dirty. I'm sure I smelled bad, but she didn't mind. We were both very tired now, but I was, again, just very, very grateful. Please understand, today I consider myself a very, very fortunate man, except for the terrible emotional shocks and some asthma problems and some numb feelings. I mean, I was numb for several days, and walking across half the city, I had essentially gotten out of a disaster without a scratch, or so I thought. In 2016, they actually had to remove my left lung, and it was because of all the contamination that I had inhaled from 9/11. But I still consider myself very blessed. The doctor, the surgeon who operated on me, asked me, he said, and he took pictures of this because, of course, as a thoracic surgeon, he had never seen anything like this before. He said, "How did you manage to breathe out of one lung?" I said, "No one can breathe out of one lung. It's impossible. You breathe out of both lungs." He said, "No, you don't understand." So he shows me a picture of my right lung. It's pink. It's perfect. Absolutely untouched. My left lung reminded me of a piece of burnt bacon. I mean, it was literally black. I mean, I can only say that it's my belief I was shielded by a higher power because my work wasn't done yet, or whatever. And I don't want to become too preachy, but I definitely feel like that was a miracle for me, and that I am still alive today because that right lung, however it happened, remained absolutely uncontaminated from all the garbage I had breathed in.
Well, I am sure with just the injuries that you sustained, you have a great deal of empathy for those who worked at Ground Zero afterwards.
Oh,
and
absolutely.
all the medical issues they have.
Yeah, I had to join the World Trade Center health organization. I still get emails from them and update them on my health status and such. And yeah, I really feel that the city was very smart. I mean, there were many people who didn't join the registry for many years after 9/11 because they had no idea of the long-reaching consequences that the poisons that were spewed into the air, how many people were affected. And I know just from research that I have done, one of the women that I saw that we washed her face off was a lovely young Black woman. She died a few years back, and I remember in shock kind of seeing her picture and remembering who she was. When we were walking, we saw the chaplain attached to the fire department.
Mm-hmm.
He was giving last rites to somebody,
Oh,
and we passed him as he was doing that. And it wasn't until a day or two later that I found out when he had removed his fire hat to perform last rites, he was struck and killed by falling debris from the tower. And just to remember that and seeing that event, it was very difficult, very emotionally.
so this was, you saw him minutes before it happened?
Yeah, essentially.
Is there any one thing from that day that you see in your head that haunts you the most?
Seeing, I think the two things that I remember most was, as haunting as the impacts were, later seeing people jumping out the windows to not burn to death.
You saw that.
Seeing bodies.
Ugh.
I didn't see the people falling. I saw bodies and clothing in the East River.
Okay.
That was that had, the East River is not that close to the Twin Towers, so you're talking about debris that had literally been blown into the river, and seeing that debris floating underneath the 59th Street Bridge. That's something I will never forget. Seeing the explosion, the gouts of flame coming out of that building from the second impact, and seeing all the paper from the financial center just glittering down in the sunlight on this beautiful day. And it was pretty terrible.
What did the air smell like? Was there a different smell in the air?
Yes. New York does not have a pleasant smell.
No.
I will tell you what I have told other people in a cleaned up version is that New York generally smells like bus fumes and dog poop. That's just the way downtown Manhattan is. It's very crowded. It's very,
and you just acclimate
it's not
to
very
it.
clean. Now the city had this terrible, acrid, burning smell. It just smelled like the entire city was burning. And of course, there was nowhere in the city that you could be that you could not see flames and smoke. The smoke did not stop. Most people didn't realize that the flames were actually not completely extinguished at Ground Zero for almost 6 months.
You're kidding.
It took them almost long. I actually have a number of facts that I had, if you don't mind, I'd like to actually go into.
No, please.
Some of them were, 2,753 people were killed at the World Trade Center site in Lower Manhattan. And with all due respect to all the other locations that were attacked that day, I'm keeping my focus on this because that's what I personally experienced. Of those who perished in the initial attack and subsequent collapses of towers, 343 were New York City firefighters. 23 were New York City police officers, and 37 were officers from the Port Authority. On September 11th, Officer John Perry was at police headquarters filing his retirement papers when he was notified about the first plane striking the tower. He rushed to the scene to assist with rescue operations and was killed when one of the towers collapsed. He was the only off-duty police officer killed on 9/11. It was estimated that had the attacks taken place even an hour later, as many as an additional 31,000 deaths would have occurred, because an additional 8,000 people would have been trapped above the impact site, and another 23,000 people would have died in stairwells while trying to evacuate the World Trade Center. The number of children who lost a parent that day was 3,051. 17 babies, however, were subsequently born to women whose husbands had died during the attack. And although nearly 10,000 firefighters from all over the country ultimately responded, it still took until December I'm sorry, it was December 20th. It was over 100 days to extinguish all the fires that were ignited by the terror attacks in New York City. On May 30th, 2002, the cleanup at Ground Zero officially ended. It would take 3.1 million hours of labor to clean up 1.8 million tons of wreckage. 20 people were actually rescued alive from the rubble in the World Trade Center site. The last was rescued far beneath the rubble 27 hours after the North Towers collapsed. And only 291 dead bodies were recovered from Ground Zero. The New York City Department of Citywide Administrative Services, the Division of Design and Construction, assisted by FEMA, the Army Corps of Engineers, OSHA, Office of Emergency Management, oversaw all recovery efforts. And we actually had to return 100,000 body bags that had been procured to deal with the anticipated death toll. Search and rescue dogs, there was over 400 dogs. They found so few living people that it was causing them great stress because they believed they had failed in their mission. Handlers and rescue workers actually had to regularly hide in the rubble in order to give the rescue dogs, a successful find and to keep their spirits up.
I had no clue.
Workers sifted through more than 1 million tons of debris looking for human remains and personal effect. They ultimately found 65,000 individual remains and other items, including 437 watches and 144 wedding rings. Those aboard the 4 hijacked flights, which was American 11, United 175, American 77, and United 93, were all heroes. They calmly called family and friends from their cell phone. There was no shouting, no evidence of hysteria on any of the calls. They alerted authorities to the hijacking, which enabled them to understand why they could not track the planes after their navigation systems were switched off. One of the unsung heroes in 9/11 was a guide dog named Rosalie, a yellow Labrador, who led her blind owner, Michael Hickson, down 78 stories of the North Tower and home to a friend. I can keep going on. You don't mind listening to?
No, I love it.
all
I
these?
think these are important facts that people need to understand.
The total cost of the cleanup at Ground Zero was approximately $5 billion. Estimated cost of the World Trade site damage, including damage to surrounding buildings, infrastructure, and subway facilities, was $60 billion. The estimated economic loss during the first 4 weeks after the World Trade Center collapse in New York City was over $123 billion. On December 13th, 2001, the United States government released a tape which Osama bin Laden took responsibility for the September 11 attacks. On May 2nd, 2011, Osama bin Laden was finally brought to justice. May 10th, 2014, the unidentified remains of those killed in the attacks were returned to the World Trade Center site, where they are still kept in a repository under the jurisdiction of the Office of the Chief Medical Examiner of the City of New York until further identifications can be made. Now, I updated this in 2019. According to a statement released on July 11th, 2019 by the Chief Medical Examiner's Office, 2 additional victims of the World Trade Center had been positively identified due to more sophisticated DNA testing becoming available. The testing was performed on remains recovered in 2013. However, as of that date, only 1,643, which is less than 60% of the 2,753 victims' remains, had been positively identified.
You know what? I'm really actually amazed that it's that high with such devastation.
I mean, when you're talking about bone fragments, I've heard stories where there were buildings that were blocks and blocks away, and they were removing a large air conditioning unit from the top of a building. And sure enough, when they moved it, they found additional remains wedged between these two units, and they were sent to the medical examiner's office again for identification. Those remains, if you visit the museum and that is at the World Trade Center site, are still there, and they have a mosaic of blue tiles, one for each person that died that day. The interesting thing, though, is that out of all 2,753 tiles, every one of them is a fractionally different shade of blue to distinguish each one for each individual. I thought that was
Wow.
and a very interesting way to pay homage to all those individuals. I feel like our Heavenly Father did intervene in this, and I don't know if that's an appropriate topic for this.
No, that's fine. In fact, John, I was going to ask you, what miracles do you see that happened that day out of this horrible, nightmarish, evil day?
Yeah.
Do you
Well, let me
find
tell you,
any miracles?
some might ask, where was God on September 11th? Well, I will tell you, he was everywhere. During my extended time in the mayor's bunker, I was part of a tremendous team tasked with coordinating the city's recovery efforts. As such, I was privy to an extensive number of stories told by people who did not die on 9/11. While the circumstances of each story were unique, they all had a similar theme. All of them experienced obstacles that delayed them long enough to prevent their arrival prior to the disaster. People told me about unexpected traffic delays, subway delays, commuter train delays. A PATH train packed with commuters was stopped at a signal due to a sick passenger just short of the World Trade Center. It returned to Jersey City so he could receive medical attention, and all those people were saved. One man survived 9/11 because he took his son to kindergarten that day. Another was late because it was his turn to buy the donuts that morning. Many told me they were late because their alarm clocks had inexplicably failed to go off. One woman had a child who dawdled and didn't get ready as soon as he should have. The one that struck me most, though, was a man who told me he put on a new pair of shoes that morning. What could that possibly have to do with him surviving? Well, he went to work his usual way, but before he got there, he developed a blister on his foot. So he stopped at a drugstore in Penn Station to buy a Band-Aid, and that is why he is alive today. The company that owned the World Trade Center had scheduled a meeting on 9/11 on the 88th floor of the North Tower to discuss what to do in the event of a terrorist attack.
Wow.
But we scheduled the night before because one participant could not attend. When all transportation out of the city was shut down, the Coast Guard issued an all vessel alert requesting assistance from all commercial and civilian mariners in the area. The Coast Guard then coordinated with boat owners who managed to transport over 500,000 people away from Manhattan Island to Brooklyn and New Jersey in an act of courage that became known as the 9/11 boat lift.
Have you seen that documentary, John? It's absolutely amazing.
Yes.
It's incredible. You can't help but tear up with that.
Interestingly, the only American not on Earth during 9/11 was astronaut Frank L. Cuthbertson, who recorded the event from the International Space Station. He later learned that the pilot of the plane that struck the Pentagon was Charles Burlingham, a classmate of his from the United States Naval Academy. Ben Sliney, the chief of air traffic control operations at the FAA's command center in Herndon, Virginia, gave the unprecedented order to ground more than 4,000 planes across the nation and redirect any in the sky to the nearest airport. It was his first day on the job. The only plane allowed to fly on 9/11 after the attacks was a plane from San Diego to Miami that was delivering antivenom to a man that had been bitten by a highly poisonous snake. Even that was accompanied by 2 fighter jets.
Crazy.
No one can tell me that our Heavenly Father was not with each of us that terrible day. one final update. As I mentioned earlier, my former deputy director, Bob Devlin, and I left our office and found his daughter, Kate, so that he could deliver her safely home. And that morning back in 2019, when I had updated this, Bob wrote me to say that Kate and her husband were expecting their fourth child that year, and that his son Bryant currently has a daughter and a son. This will be the fifth time that Bob has become a grandfather, and Lily and I also had anticipated becoming grandparents at the end of 2019. And that little girl is sleeping right next door to me now, and she's 20 months old. I mean, there's a timeline which pretty much everybody knows about. I just felt like I had to say, as terrible as that day was, it could have been and would have been much, much worse had our Heavenly Father not intervened and saved all those people that could be saved. It was, again, it's why I consider myself one of the luckiest people on earth, just to still be standing here at this point and to have avoided all the pitfalls that most certainly could have killed anybody in a completely random fashion. There are many times when people would, instead of going to the office, I would divert and I would go to the World Trade Center because there were food trucks there, and just so happened that this day I was headed directly for the office, and it took me a couple of days to kind of recover from the shock of everything that went on. But after, I think it was on the second day after I had gotten home, I received a call, and the city needed me to, and tens of thousands of other people to come and help coordinate the relief efforts. And that's what we did. We reported to a military vessel, the medical ship Hope, and it was docked at Pier 19. I forget what pier it was, but it was docked there, and they set up a command post, and that's where we first reported. And security was indescribable. I mean, my wife was driving me there with her brother so that she wouldn't have to travel home alone. And they went to drop me off, and they kept going through ring after ring of security, and they were using mirrors to look under cars to make sure there were no bombs planted, and they had bomb sniffing dogs checking every person, and they had people checking triplicate forms of identification to let us pass. Now, something else that was interesting, one of the first things they had to do was give identification to everybody, and they gave you identification, I think, from like A to Z, and if you had A, you could get near the place but not actually go in, and Z, you could basically go anywhere at any time. And because I was the guy who paid the bills, I had Z. They made sure I could go anywhere I needed to make sure that everything that the city employees needed and the uniform services needed to get the job done was being procured and paid for. Even that, you'd think, well, what's so interesting? What kind of role would the accountants play? In 9/11, I had somebody from Canada call me. They had been bounced around because nobody knew what to do with them. Mm-hmm. And this gentleman heard we needed fuel to run the generators that were spotlighting the Ground Zero at night so that the work could continue, that the rescue efforts could continue uninterrupted. And he told me that he had mortgaged his home.
No.
And he had purchased a 50,000-gallon trailer of fuel, and he was going to deliver it with his father the following day. Was there any way I could help make sure I got him paid within 30 days? And I said, well, we'll do our best, but things are kind of crazy here. He said, you don't understand. If I don't pay them back in 30 days, I lose my home. He said, I understand. I gave him my personal guarantee that he would get paid within 30 days, and he absolutely did. And he was just one of the people that volunteered from all over the world, really, that just did extraordinary things to help us on our day of greatest need. And
How apprehensive were you going back into the city that day?
well, I tell you, I was anxious to help, but I have to tell you, those multiple rings of security and most New Yorkers had not seen heavily armed troops, surrounding, and it was, again, it was ring after ring, and every ring of security got tighter and more intense, and they were,
Did that make
by
you
the time
feel safer?
but was that,
Did it make
no,
you
well,
safer?
I guess it did, but it sure made me nervous because,
What are they expecting?
right, and that
Yeah.
was really, I think the worst part of the entire story was how apprehensive people were, because nobody knew, is
Yes.
something else coming? Is it coming today? Is it coming tomorrow? How far reaching? Nobody really realized how lucky these guys got. And, the fact that it was just a series of events that all conspired to create the disaster that it I'm happy to say that on a recent visit to New York to celebrate my wife's niece, her wedding, that New York is in good shape and doing fine. Thank you. And as we're coming up on the 20th anniversary of this, I look forward and take comfort in the ceremonies and the various things that the city does to pay homage to the people who had to endure and experience that day.